What's up, it's your boy Hobo Drobo, and today we're opening the floodgates because this deck has crazy swarm potential. And the star of today's show is the Ranger's Hideout because it has two key skills that perfectly synergize with this deck. Their passive skill, Forest Vines, synergizes nicely with the stalling potential of our Spell Cycle, Allura, and the Glacial Druid. Meanwhile, the Verdant Defenders go crazy with the Necroskeletons, and if you can get the Ghost boosters, most decks can't keep up in those early rounds. And in the later rounds, you could even go with the Necro Death Rider or the Frost Giant for some late game pressure. However, you really want to prioritize winning in those first few rounds because this deck does have a few weaknesses. I built this deck for Onslaught, however you may be able to get away with it in Stadium, although it really takes advantage of putting pressure on your opponent early because they're going to have to keep up with your defense, and if you can wipe out things before your opponent does with Allura's micro potential, then there's not much they can do. Archmages can take advantage by TPing the troops you send to your side. However, if you can get those wins in those early rounds, it's often difficult for those Archmages to even set up in the first place. And Allura is weak to those sniper shots and the tar missiles, but by applying pressure early, it makes it difficult for your opponent to put resources into those skills. And that's basically what my plan is against Binguini here. He does have Barrisad, which is a little bit difficult in those later rounds against bigger swarms, but since I'm able to chip away at him early, it makes it impossible for him to really make any counter move on me. I really like this deck because it has high risk, high reward, where you're going to win a lot of those early rounds, but if you do make it to the later rounds, it is a little bit difficult because it's overall putting out less DPS than most decks. However, if you can get all of your swarm upgrades and just manage to hold on until those later rounds, and you have a lot of those stalling key elements like the spells in this deck, then you can often hold on, and even if you can't do enough damage, there's nothing they can do to stop everything coming their way. And while the Death Rider and the Frost Giant are both good troop sending options, I do get a little bit worried about the Archmages teleporting them to my side, so I prefer catching them off guard with the Verdant Defenders, because they're very similar to like the Warmadillos or the Dragon Bonds where they have a lot of grouped up things pushing at you fast and they have to react right then, compared to something like the Frost Giant or the Necro Rider where they have a little bit more time to react, and so if they need to build up gold to counter it, they can. But with the Verdant Defenders, they have to act right then and there. And you saw at the end of that round I used Allura's micro. This time it was a draw, but that is very important for knocking off those early rounds, because sometimes it can come down to a second or less than a second where you knock that life off. And I want to stress the importance of knocking off those early rounds, because if you're able to send something strong like a dragon as well, let's say you don't get the ghosts or something to swarm, it makes it so that they can't ignore the dragon and let it go through. I've said a lot in my older videos that sometimes it's okay to let those high HP tanky troops go, because it's better to let those go than to let the low HP ones in case you can't do enough damage. But when you're swarming them early and taking those early lives off in Onslaught, it makes it so that they can't even afford to do that. And I've always thought that the Rangers have some nice potential, and I don't know why I didn't think about synergizing it initially with the Necro, but I think that's because I just completely forgot about the dogs that you can release. And so now having another troop sending option up your sleeve is just crazy because there's a ton of versatility, so you can really send troops depending on what your opponent can't defend. And again, this was another good round example of using that Allura micro and using that spell cycle early on to get a lot of damage and then getting those troops down before the opponent. And so we're going to hit him with the Flex Emo because I'm feeling good. And I was really thinking here, should I go with the Ghosts or the Troll Zerker? And I ended up going with the Troll Zerker because I realized he doesn't have a lot of damage to take care of it early on. And so I figured if I can take out my Troll Zerker along with everything else, then he won't be able to keep up and will win on this round right here. Because while swarming is really good, sometimes you have to pay attention and see, do I have enough swarming? And then should I mix in a nice high HP tanky troop so that they have to get some variety of defenses in there instead of just being able to spam artilleries and take out your swarms right away. And so that Troll Zerker is actually really important for this overall strategy. And so while his Barrisad is distracted on that Troll Zerker, it's time to release the dogs. And I'll bet you he was not expecting this, because like I said before, it's almost like another booster that they're just not expecting. So getting almost 2 boosters in one round is kind of crazy, and you can see they're chugging through that map, and he's forced to react to it very fast. So Binguini here doing a nice job of hanging on, and you can see that those Necromancers I really like on this map, because they're getting so much value from the spots that they're placed in, compared to some of the other maps that I tried to use them in. And you'll also see that I only have one Glacial Druid at the bottom, And if you guys know me, you know I love the Dwarven Artillery, and you know that that's actually my main source of damage for most of my strategies. But for the Glacial Druid, it doesn't do a lot of damage. So instead, I end up using it just for the slow ability on those bottom waves, because that's where I'm using my spell cycle, and then it just makes my spell cycle even stronger. But I do prefer the Death Riders as well as the Verdant Dogs over the Frost Giant to start, because they're putting fast pressure on my opponent compared to the Frost Giant that's very slow. And I think another important aspect of this deck is that because you have so many troop sending options, it's important to spread out those upgrades throughout the different rounds. So for example, I sent the Verdant Defenders first, and now this round I'm going to send the Death Rider, hopefully catching them off guard again, because if they have it in their mindset that, okay, they have to defend the Verdant Dogs this time, they're going to think that again next time, because they're not going to expect that Death Rider compared to if you had sent them in the same round. So just make sure you're adjusting your methods and sending troops based on what deck you're going against, as well as what map you're on. And while this deck can struggle in those later rounds for overall DPS, I'm often not concerned because my opponent is so focused on defending everything that they can't buy skills to disrupt me. And so I'm overall putting out less damage in general because I'm not dealing with as much. And so just for that fact alone, it doesn't really matter that I don't have something powerful like an Arcane or an Archmage or the Dwarven Artillery, because the whole goal is to just overswarm your opponent. And what's nice about the speed difference between all of the troops you can send is that it really clutters your opponent's board, and it makes it difficult for them to clump up everything for artillery splash damage. And so you can see here that Death Rider was sneaky, and I'm able to get that win because of it. Let's hop into another match here. And this is a good example of what my opponent thinks they're going to do when they see that I have a Laura. And I would probably be the same way getting those Musketeers up. But 4? I mean, this guy must be having nightmares about a Laura. And so he's going to do whatever he can to make sure that I don't get value for microing her. But because I'm able to get those Rangers up right away and send those Verdant Dogs, there's nothing he can do to defend. And then all of a sudden he's caught off guard and he thinks he's slick with those Musketeers. But nah. Those dogs are going to come in clutch, and they're going to overswarm him in round 4. A lot of people are not going to be expecting those Verdant Dogs because not many people use the Rangers, and so I think that's also what gives it a nice advantage against some of these decks that are very popular. Although he is using Sorcerer, which isn't very good, however, I do think Sorcerer and Tesla is a nice synergy together, and I do want to try that in the future. But his Bear's Hat also goes down, which means by New Year's Eve he won't even have him back. And that allows for the floodgates to open. And so as we wrap up this video, I do want to go over a few matches that I had yesterday that were just too crazy to not share with you guys. And so Garden here, I think that's how you say his name. Yeah, Garden. So Garden here is running a very similar deck to what I'm running, and we're basically doing the exact same strategy with those Archmage TPs, and credit to him because he had that down very well. And Ilaria is not a very strong hero, so I give them a lot of credit as well. They knew how to use Ilaria very nicely. And so this came down to just being who could TP enough troops to the other side. And that was really tricky because I was down 1-3. And so I wish I had recorded this full match because this was a classic matchup. And this was one of the closest battles that I've ever had. And it was a very nice comeback. But shout out to Garden. This was a really cool map to play this strategy on as well. And I was having some decent success on it. Although it was definitely difficult in the beginning when I didn't know which towers to upgrade first. So when it comes to switching it up on different maps, it's usually not the tower combo, but it's which towers you prioritize upgrading first. So definitely keep that in mind as well. Those archery scouts there were very clutch in the early rounds for taking care of almost anything, and then the Archmages are very important for teleporting the golems that get sent, because that is the most popular booster on this map, and then the Musketeers are just good for picking off troops here and there and getting damage all across the map. And I was worried about that JT moving through, but the archery scouts and the Musketeers just did so much damage, so it didn't matter. So GG Garden, this was an awesome match. And I'll use this clip as an example to show you what I'm still using in Stadium. I think Barrisad is better overall, and it does have to heavily do with the fact that I have to keep up with the level 11 dragons, and Vesper just unfortunately isn't enough to keep up with what level I have him at right now. So I'm using this classic deck still, and I wanted to showcase it against this guy because I used Vesper twice before him and lost, and then as soon as I switched to Barrisad, I won. And so that's the main reason I like Onslaught a little bit more than Stadium right now, because I feel like I can use a different variety of decks, as well as being able to see different kind of decks from other kind of people. For example, Dark Knight here, who's using that Necromancer and Battle Mecha, but unfortunately he wasn't able to get a win here, but it was really cool to see him hang on and almost get a win with the Battle Mecha. So let me know what you guys think of this Necromancer deck, and if you try it, do you have any success? And if you tweak anything, what did you do to cater to your playstyle? Otherwise, good luck in the next battles, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace out.